Everyone thinks they know themselves until the moment life forces them to face the truth. For years, he walked into the same office with the same tired routine deadlines, noise, pressure, people demanding more than he had left to give. But on one ordinary Monday morning, he made a decision that would quietly drag him into a psychological war he wasn't prepared for. 7 days of absolute Stoic discipline, no reactions, no excuses, no emotional escapes. At first, it felt simple, almost easy, but by day 3, something unsettling began to happen. His mind grew too quiet. Old fears resurfaced. Hidden patterns he never noticed started exposing themselves like cracks in a wall. And by day 7, the moment that terrified him wasn't the chaos around him. It was the person he discovered inside. Because the scariest truth is this: when you silence the world, you can finally hear the parts of yourself you've been avoiding your whole life. The office always sounded the same: humming lights, clicking keyboards, muffled conversations leaking through thin cubicle walls. But that morning something felt different. He stood at the building entrance long enough for the automatic doors to hesitate, sensing his pause, as if even the machine knew he was crossing into unfamiliar territory. For years, he had walked through this hallway, half awake, surviving on caffeine, fake smiles, and the silent hope that today wouldn't crush him as hard as yesterday. But this time he walked with a strange stillness inside him, a decision burning under his breath. 7 days of pure, unbreakable Stoic discipline. No emotional reactions, no anger, no frustration, no escaping to complaining, scrolling, blaming, or hiding. Just observation, control, inner command. He wasn't sure what he was trying to prove, only that something had to change. His life had become a loop. Stress, exhaustion, numbness, repeat. The kind of cycle that makes a man forget who he once wanted to become. As he entered the elevator, a familiar dread rose in his chest, the same anxiety that crept in every morning as he prepared for the battlefield of meetings, deadlines, and people who mistook urgency for dominance. Usually, he would let that dread swallow him whole. But today, he stared at his reflection in the elevator doors and whispered a single sentence: "You will not be moved." It felt powerful, almost too powerful. When he reached his floor, the day hit him like a storm waiting behind a curtain. Within minutes, his manager was at his desk, irritated, talking too fast, listing 3 new urgent tasks that contradicted yesterday's instructions. Normally, he would defend himself or explain, but he didn't. He breathed. He watched. He listened. No reaction. It unsettled his manager. It unsettled him even more. A coworker knocked into his chair without apologizing. Someone forwarded him a mistake-filled spreadsheet and blamed him for it. A client email arrived, written in pure hostility. Every moment was a test, and he passed, but not with ease. Each second felt like holding a heavy door shut against a storm trying to burst through. His mind kept whispering, "React, fight back, defend yourself." But the discipline held him still. By lunchtime, something strange happened. The world felt sharper, too sharp. He could hear his heartbeat more clearly than the office noise. He could feel emotions rising inside him like trapped pressure, but he did not let them escape. And that was the beginning of the terror, the realization that silence doesn't bring peace at first. It brings everything you've ignored. When the day ended, he walked out of the building with a heavy truth settling into his bones. The battle wasn't with the office. It was with himself. Day 1 was over, and something deep inside him had already begun to crack. Day 2 began with the same fluorescent hum, the same smell of stale coffee, the same voices carrying fragmented urgency across the office floor. Yet for him, everything had changed. The world looked identical, but he felt alien inside his own skin. The discipline he swore to uphold was no longer just an experiment. It had become a crucible, testing every nerve, every instinct he had cultivated over years of conformity. He sat at his desk, staring at the screen, while an endless chain of emails demanded immediate attention. Normally, he would have rushed to reply, a jittery panic pulsing through his veins, but today he waited. He inhaled deeply, allowing each word on the screen to land without judgment. The panic still existed. It throbbed at the edges of his consciousness, but he refused to feed it. He had become a spectator of his own mind. By mid-morning, the first real challenge arrived. A colleague, competitive and sharp-tongued, approached his desk, her words sharp and cutting, probing for weakness. She expected a reaction, a flinch, a defensive tone, a nervous glance, but he met her gaze with calm, not arrogance, not fear, only presence, silence. She faltered for a moment, confused, unsure if she had misjudged him. That small victory was intoxicating and terrifying at once. He realized he was learning something profound. Power doesn't announce itself with volume. It lives in restraint. The tension grew like a storm inside him. Every office interruption, every miscommunication, every unprovoked criticism became a mirror reflecting his inner chaos. He could no longer escape himself behind routines or excuses. The discipline demanded confrontation, not of others, but of his own impulses. Day 2 was exposing patterns he had ignored, the resentment he carried, the frustration he numbed with coffee and distraction, the constant fear of appearing weak. By lunchtime, his mind was raw. He could feel the edges of panic sharpening, whispering that he was cracking under the pressure. But he remembered the simple rule he had set for himself: observe, breathe, act with intention, or not at all. He repeated it like a mantra, each syllable a hammer striking the chains that bound his mind. As the afternoon wore on, he noticed something remarkable. His reactions, once automatic and explosive, now had space between them, a pause where choice existed. In that pause, he discovered clarity, a terrifying clarity that revealed truths he had spent decades avoiding. He saw his ambitions clearly, his fears more plainly, and the depth of his own complacency. By the time the office lights dimmed, exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but there was also a strange exhilaration. He had survived day 2 not by fighting the world, but by confronting himself. And in that confrontation, the faintest glimpse of transformation flickered like dawn breaking behind storm clouds. As he left the office, the silence of the empty streets pressed against him. He realized the terrors of the coming days wouldn't come from emails or coworkers. They would come from what he would see in the mirror of his mind. Day 2 had ended, but the true battle was only beginning. Day 3 arrived like a whisper of impending storm. The office seemed quieter than usual, yet every sound felt sharper, more intrusive: the hum of the air conditioner, the soft tap of keyboards, the rustle of papers. It was as if the world itself was conspiring to test him, to measure the strength of the discipline he had sworn to uphold. By now, the experiment was no longer about productivity or proving a point. It had become a confrontation with himself. The morning began with an urgent email from a client, full of impatience and subtle blame. In the past, his heart would have raced, his palms would have sweated, and words would have spilled out defensively, a futile shield against imagined attacks. Today, he paused. He breathed. He allowed the words to settle on the screen without judgment. There was a silence in that pause, a quiet space where clarity began to emerge. He realized that every reaction he once had was a surrender to chaos. By mid-morning, the real challenge appeared. His manager called him into a meeting room. A critical error from a project was being discussed, and the tension was palpable. Colleagues shifted uneasily, expecting him to crumble, to justify, to panic. But he remained calm, letting the facts speak for themselves. His voice was steady, measured. Each word was deliberate. The room felt strangely off balance, as if the air itself had shifted. In that silence, he saw power, the power of mastery over oneself, and it terrified him. Yet terror was not external. It was within. Day 3 revealed cracks he had ignored, moments when he had avoided confrontation, excuses he had fed himself, the subtle lies he told to appear competent. Stoic discipline demanded more than restraint. It demanded honesty with the self, even when the truth was uncomfortable. And as he sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of the office around him, he realized the terror wasn't about failure. It was about facing the unvarnished reality of who he truly was. Lunch came and went without distraction. He observed coworkers around him, noting their patterns, their frustrations, their attachments to outcomes. He noticed something almost frightening. He no longer felt the need to react, to argue, to compete. A strange clarity was emerging, a quiet strength that made the noise of the office almost irrelevant. But clarity came at a cost. The mind, stripped of its habitual deflections, exposed every weakness. every fear, every insecurity. By the time the afternoon sun fell through the windows, he felt both exhausted and alive in a way he hadn't in years. Day 3 had revealed a simple yet terrifying truth. Discipline doesn't make life easier. It strips it down to its raw, unfiltered essence. And in that rawness, he saw both danger and opportunity. As the office emptied and the lights dimmed, he walked out into the street with a newfound awareness. He was no longer running from himself, but the silent reckoning had only begun. Day 3 ended, but the mirror of truth had begun reflecting a version of him he could not ignore. Day 4 arrived, not with warning, but with a weight that pressed down on his chest the moment he stepped into the office. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the hum of computers sharper, the murmur of coworkers louder. He realized, almost immediately, that the challenge was no longer external, it was entirely internal. The first 3 days had been preparation. Today, the pressure would reveal whether his discipline was real or fragile. The morning began with an impossible task. A project deadline had been moved up, forcing him to confront hours of work compressed into minutes. Normally, panic would have surged, a tidal wave of anxiety pulling him under. Today, he paused. He reminded himself of the rule he had set. Observe, breathe, act with intention or not at all. Each action he took was deliberate. Each reaction he withheld built a subtle but undeniable control, a quiet dominance over his own mind. By mid-morning, his manager's sharp words sliced through the air, as if aimed directly at his resolve. Criticisms, subtle jabs, and indirect blame, the usual triggers for irritation and resentment, now collided with something new, a calm so profound it unnerved even him. He noticed the room holding its breath, waiting for him to break, to justify, to explode, but he didn't, and in that silence, power began to take shape. Yet power never comes without cost. The mind, unshielded by excuses and distractions, began to expose the deep patterns he had long avoided. Memories of past failures rose like shadows in the corners of his consciousness, whispering doubt, demanding acknowledgement. He could feel frustration building inside, a coil of tension threatening to unwind. But he breathed, and in each breath, he discovered something terrifying. The chaos had always been inside him. The office, the deadlines, the critiques, they were only mirrors. By lunchtime, the realization deepened. Every reaction he had ever allowed in anger or fear was rooted in avoidance. Every moment he had surrendered to impulse, he had lost a piece of himself. Now, with discipline as his only ally, he saw clearly the full landscape of his inner mind, the faults, the insecurities, the unspoken fears. The clarity was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the afternoon wore on, the tasks multiplied as if the universe itself wanted to test his resolve. Emails piled up. Unexpected problems emerged. Coworkers pressed for answers. And still, he remained quiet, observing, choosing intention over reaction. The tension was unbearable, yet in that unbearable pressure, he began to feel a strange liberation. He was becoming the eye of the storm, silent, unmoved, and profoundly aware. When the office emptied and he walked into the cool evening air, exhaustion weighed on him physically, but his mind was sharper than ever. Day 4 had proven something undeniable. Discipline was not a shield. It was a revelation. The fear of facing himself was real, but so was the quiet power that came from facing it head-on. The terror he had anticipated from the office had never arrived. The true terror and the true lesson was discovering the storm that lived within him. Day 5 felt like walking into a storm with no shelter. The office, which had once been familiar, now resembled a labyrinth of expectations, deadlines, and silent pressures. He could feel the weight of his own mind pressing down, heavier than any task, heavier than any critique. Stoic discipline, once a shield, had become a mirror, reflecting every hidden corner of his psyche. The morning started innocuously, yet each task seemed engineered to test the limits of patience. Emails, reports, and unexpected challenges collided relentlessly. Normally, he would have rushed through, letting frustration dictate his every move. Today, he paused, he breathed, he observed. He allowed the tension to exist without letting it control him. By mid-morning, a subtle crisis erupted. A project he was overseeing hit a critical error, one that could have invoked panic, blame, and excuses. But he responded differently. Calm, deliberate, precise, each action was intentional, each choice measured. He realized something terrifying. He had become the master of the chaos he once feared. Yet the inner crucible had its costs. His mind, stripped of distraction, revealed the truth. Years of avoidance, denial, and compromise had hollowed him in ways he hadn't recognized. Day 5 forced him to confront those shadows, the insecurities he masked, the fears he ignored, the patterns he excused. Each revelation was a sharp strike, uncomfortable and raw. Lunch arrived, but he barely noticed. The world felt distant. Observing coworkers, he saw their struggles, their reactive chaos, and he recognized the reflection of his own past self. The tension was unbearable, yet liberation was emerging from the same fire. By mid-afternoon, even the office noise seemed to bend around him, silent in acknowledgement of the calm that now radiated from his presence. When the day ended, he walked into the evening air, lungs full, heart pounding, mind alive. The terror of discovering himself, the rawness of this crucible, had not broken him, it had begun to forge him. He realized with chilling clarity, the storm he feared in the office was never external. It lived inside, and now he commanded it. Day 6 arrived like a test from the universe itself. He had weathered 4 days of discipline and confrontation, yet he sensed the real trial was imminent. The office buzzed with urgency, whispers of impossible deadlines, and subtle undercurrents of criticism. The chaos of other people's minds collided with his own inner war, intensifying it. That morning, a colleague challenged him directly, questioning his decisions in front of the team. Normally, such confrontation would have sparked defensiveness, anger, or resentment. Today, he felt a strange calm, an awareness that every reaction was a choice. He did not justify himself, did not argue, did not retreat. Instead, he observed. Silence became his weapon, and in that quiet, the tension itself seemed to unravel. By midday, exhaustion began to gnaw at him. His body craved escape, his mind craved distraction. He was tempted to break the discipline he had fought so hard to maintain. But he remembered the mantra: observe, breathe, act with intention or not at all. He repeated it in the silence of his office. Every pause, every breath, every still moment became a hammer forging his resolve. The real terror arrived in the afternoon. Alone in a meeting room, he faced his reflection in the glass walls, confronted by the cumulative weight of 5 days of scrutiny, self-exposure, and restraint. He felt raw, stripped, exposed. His heart raced. Doubts whispered in his ears. But this was the breaking point, not of defeat, but of transformation. By the time the office emptied, he was exhausted yet alive. He had seen himself stripped of all pretense, all avoidance, all excuses. And in that exposure, he recognized the terrifying truth. Discipline doesn't just change your actions, it reveals your soul. Day 7 dawned quiet and eerie. The office seemed unusually still, as if aware of the culmination approaching. He arrived with anticipation tempered by exhaustion. The past 6 days had revealed fears, exposed weaknesses, and tested patience, yet nothing compared to today. Today, the final confrontation awaited not with the office, not with colleagues, not with deadlines, but with himself. Each task, each interaction, each interruption became a reflection of his inner mastery. Emails arrived aggressive, managers questioned decisions, coworkers pressed for explanations, but he remained unmoved. The chaos swirled around him like a storm, yet he was its calm center. He observed, measured, and acted with clarity. By midday, a subtle shift occurred. He noticed a quiet power radiating from his stillness. Colleagues' expectations, criticisms, and chaos no longer rattled him. He realized he had become the eye of the storm, unshaken by external forces, because he had confronted the internal turbulence first. Lunch brought reflection. Alone with his thoughts, he acknowledged the journey: exhaustion, terror, confrontation, revelation. Stoic discipline had stripped him raw, exposing both fear and potential. The revelation was humbling and terrifying. His mind had been his greatest adversary, and now his most powerful ally. As the final hours of Day 7 approached, he moved through the office with a quiet authority. His actions were deliberate, his presence calm, his mind fully awake. The tension that had once consumed him was transformed into clarity, precision, and insight. He observed patterns others missed, corrected errors without panic, and handled criticism with serene confidence. He understood now that the terror of the past week was never about external chaos, it was about facing the truth inside himself. Each challenge, each confrontation, each moment of restraint had forged a new awareness. Control begins within, and mastery begins with discipline. By the evening, he reflected on the journey. The 7 days had revealed his deepest fears, exposed hidden weaknesses, and yet, in the same process, awakened a calm power he had never known. He was no longer reactive, no longer dependent on external validation. He had become the master of his mind, and by extension, his life. The 7th day ended with the office empty, the lights dimmed, the hum fading. He stood by the window, looking out at the city, feeling the weight of the week settle into quiet clarity. The storm had passed not around him, but inside him. The terror of discovery, the raw confrontation, the unrelenting discipline, it had all led to this, a stillness that was neither weak nor empty, but profoundly alive. He felt the truth of Stoic mastery. The world does not control you. Fear does not control you. Only you have the power to command your mind, to respond with calm, to act with intention. He breathed deeply. The office chaos, the deadlines, the pressures, they were nothing compared to the power he had discovered within himself. A quiet smile touched his lips, a sense of eternal calm settling into his bones. Discipline is not a punishment, he whispered. It is freedom, it is power, it is truth. And in that stillness, the city, the office, the world itself seemed to bow in silent acknowledgement. The storm had ended, but the transformation would endure forever.